When the message of Islam stepped out of secrecy and into the open air of Mecca, the city felt as if a spark had been thrown into dry grass. The Quraysh had watched the early followers with curiosity at first, wondering what this new teaching meant. But once the Prophet began calling openly to worship Allah alone, the tension inside Mecca rose like a tightening storm. The nobles of Quraysh had always controlled Meccan life with a firm hand. Their wealth depended on idols, their pride rested on lineage, and their influence came from their position as guardians of the Kaaba. This new message threatened all of it. They were not prepared for a revolution that asked them to leave their gods, abandon their inherited customs, and stand equal with slaves, foreigners, and the poor. But the Prophet continued inviting people with calm certainty. He spoke with gentleness, yet every word carried a power they could not ignore. His followers gathered quietly in the house of Al-Arqam, reciting the verses of the Quran and learning how to pray. And day by day, the numbers grew. The Quraysh decided they could no longer remain silent. Their first strategy was persuasion. They went to Abu Talib, the Prophet's uncle, hoping to end the message without conflict. Abu Talib was respected across Arabia. If he removed his protection, the message would collapse before it could grow. A group of elders approached him and said, "Your nephew has attacked our gods and insulted our traditions. Stop him, or let us deal with him." Abu Talib listened patiently, then refused with dignity. He would not hand over his nephew, no matter how strong the pressure. The Quraysh returned again and again with new offers. One day they said, "Let us give you a young man from our tribe, strong, noble, honorable, to adopt as your own. In exchange, surrender your nephew to us." Abu Talib was shocked by the foolishness of their proposal. He said, "You give me your son to feed and care for, and you want me to hand over my son so you may kill him? By Allah, this will never happen." When the Prophet heard of the pressure his uncle was facing, he feared that Abu Talib might ask him to stop preaching. He went to him and said, "My uncle, if they place the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, telling me to abandon this mission, I would never abandon it until Allah makes it victorious, or I perish." These words moved Abu Talib deeply. His eyes filled with emotion as he said, "Go, my nephew. Say whatever you wish. By Allah, I will never hand you over." This promise strengthened the Prophet's resolve, but it enraged the Quraysh. Since persuasion had failed, they turned toward insults, mockery, and slander. They followed him whenever he walked through the markets, calling him a liar, a magician, a poet, anything that could confuse the people. Yet, the more they slandered, the more people noticed the beauty of the Quran, the honesty of the Prophet, and the dignity of his message. The Quraysh soon took a darker turn. They targeted the believers, especially the weak. Bilal was dragged across burning sand with a heavy stone pinned to his chest. Ammar's parents were tortured until they died. Families were separated. Slaves were beaten. A few wealthy Muslims were mocked and threatened with the loss of trade and reputation. In the middle of this rising hostility, one single event shook Mecca to its core. The Prophet gathered the clans of Quraysh on Mount Safa and gave the public warning of the truth. Among the crowd was his uncle Abu Lahab, who shouted hateful, venom-filled words. His voice echoed through the valley, and with it began a new era of open hostility. The Prophet continued his mission with calm patience. He recited the verses of the Quran to anyone who listened, and many hearts softened. But the Quraysh, desperate to stop the growing movement, decided to try a final strategy. This time, they sent their most intelligent and diplomatic man, a respected leader named Utbah. Utbah met the Prophet privately and offered him anything: wealth, leadership, kingship. But the Prophet recited verses of the Quran to him instead. The powerful rhythm and meaning overwhelmed Utbah. He returned to his people pale and shaken, saying, "This is not the speech of a poet or a madman. Let the man be, for what he speaks will have a great outcome." His warning was ignored. The Quraysh now believed the message had grown too strong to be contained. They called for a new level of resistance. They persecuted, threatened, insulted, and isolated the believers. Even the Prophet himself was attacked in the streets. Thorns were thrown in his path. Dust was poured on his head. The intestines of a camel were placed on his back while he prostrated in prayer. One day, when he returned home covered in dirt, his daughter Fatma cried as she wiped the dust from his hair and face. He told her gently not to cry, for Allah would protect him. At the same time, the believers continued to gather in the house of Al-Arqam, strengthening their faith. Their community grew in courage and purpose. They learned patience, mercy, and determination from the Prophet, and these qualities allowed them to endure what others could not. The Quraysh realized the message was spreading faster than they could suppress it. They could no longer contain Islam inside Mecca. Something dramatic had to be done. The leaders met in their council hall, and anger filled the room. They decided to impose a total social and economic boycott on the Prophet's entire clan. The goal was to starve them into surrender. Food, trade, marriage, everything would be cut off. Anyone who helped them would be punished. They wrote a document, sealing it inside the Kaaba as if it were sacred. The boycott was a prison without walls. The Prophet's family, including those who had not accepted Islam, withdrew to a narrow valley called Shab Abu Taleb. For nearly 3 years, they lived in hardship. Children cried from hunger. Food became scarce. Leaves were eaten to survive. The cries of starving families echoed through the valley at night. Still, the Prophet remained patient. His message did not stop. His faith did not shake. And his followers endured with him. Inside Mecca, some hearts began to soften at the suffering they witnessed. A few courageous men from Quraysh felt compassion and secretly plotted to end the boycott. They demanded the document be removed from the Kaaba. When they opened it, they discovered that insects had eaten everything except the name of Allah. Shocked and ashamed, the Quraysh ended the boycott. As the Prophet and his family returned to Mecca, relief washed over their tired faces. But the trials were not yet over. A deeper sorrow was waiting, something more painful than hunger or isolation. Soon after the boycott ended, the Prophet lost 2 of the most beloved and supportive people in his life. His uncle Abu Talib passed away, and not long after, his wife Khadijah followed. The city felt suddenly darker and colder without them. These 2 deaths marked a turning point in the Prophet's life. The year became known as the Year of Sorrow. Without the protection of Abu Talib, the hostility in Mecca increased. Insults became harsher, attacks became bolder, and the Prophet found himself without the safety he had known for years. Yet, in the face of grief and danger, the Prophet did not turn back. He continued delivering the message of Islam with a strength that amazed even his enemies. But Mecca was no longer a city that would listen. The doors were closing. The streets were cruel. The hearts of the leaders were harder than stone. The Prophet began searching for a new place, somewhere beyond Mecca, where people might listen, somewhere where Islam could grow freely. His eyes turned toward a small city northeast of Mecca, a city known as Taif. He set out on foot with hope in his heart, not knowing that the road ahead would bring one of the most painful moments of his life. This was where the next stage of the journey would begin.